Good morning, it's our Sunday class special edition. Good morning, Miss Lee.
Good morning.
Time for class. Okay, Miss Lee, we're doing a special edition today. We're going to do a few weeks. We're taking a parenthesis out of the Life of Christ in Stereo, although we're expanding one of the passages in Life of Christ in Stereo. Could you read that?
I could read that. It comes from John 14, 1 through 16. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and we are satisfied. Jesus said to him, Have I been so long with you all, and you, Philip, have not known me? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, Show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and that the Father is in me? The words which I am speaking to you all, I am not speaking for myself, but the Father, who is dwelling in me. He performs the works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and that the Father is in me. But if not, believe me because of the works themselves.
Okay, so Jesus is talking about belief here and knowing God. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and just to sum that passage up, that you need to know God.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, our purpose in the church and our purpose in Christianity is not to know each other. It's not community. It's not fellowship. It's to know God and glorify Him, right?
Right.
So one of the things I see is in the Life of Christ in Stereo, we've been going through how God became a man, and He specifically showed how in this real world that we live in, which is both wonderful and terrible, it's created by God, so it's fruitful, but it's also being attacked, so it's being destroyed, and there's disease and death and all those things. Jesus is showing how He overcame as an individual, as the God-man, as a human, and also God, led by the Father. He overcame death, He overcame disease, He overcame famine, He overcame all these things, okay? But where does He get the right to do that? That's the real question that we want to take a parenthesis out of and show that He's the Creator also.
Yeah, because in our study of the Life of Christ in Stereo, we've come to the point now where he's been in the upper room for us weeks.
Well,
but
the
it wasn't that
upper
long.
room discourse, yeah, is for a night.
And told, the disciples what's coming, solidified who He is, why He's going to do this. And now the next part of the actual book, The Life of Christ in Stereo, is where He goes to His death.
To the cross,
and
yeah.
So
and that's what He came for, to die.
And so
we were born to live, He's born to die.
We thought maybe we should pause and say, okay, well, here's the story of this man who came to earth, said he was God, he did these miracles, he did this. Why was Christ even born on earth? Why did He come here? Why does He have to die now? So that's why we're taking a parenthesis.
Well, we're going, a little bit farther than that and showing what did God really want to happen. Mm-hmm. I love the four spiritual laws. The introduction says, just as there are physical laws that govern the physical universe, so there are spiritual laws that govern the relationship with God. The Declaration of Independence talks about that our rights come from the Creator, and they're from nature and nature's God. God created in nature laws of nature that encourage fruitfulness. Mm-hmm. Okay, He also created laws in nature that when you're not fruitful, there's a judgment. It destroys that. So we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 1, because I find that so many Christians misunderstand, I believe, because of theological reasons. Systematic theologians always have a way of changing Genesis chapter 1 to what they want to create in their theology.
What they want it to say.
Yeah. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. They're all a little different, but their system they cram Genesis 1 into their system, as opposed to, wait a minute, God gave Genesis 1 first for a reason.
And I think that a thing, that we have been talking about is that God gave the Bible to us, you and me, common man.
Yeah, not
so that we can understand what he was trying to say to us and what he wants us to do with our lives.
it's a blueprint for living.
Out of this came theologians, philosophers, all these other people that try to figure out what the Bible says. But God really wrote it so that we could read it and understand it.
And Jesus even talked in the upper room, remember, where he says, the Spirit is coming who will teach you all things.
Right.
And one of the things, the problems we have is, how do we read the Bible and apply it into the real life world we have? And that's a matter of hermeneutics, and I know that's a big word.
Big word.
But it's a matter of how you draw out the words, the meaning of the words. We can't say, oh, that means this to me, and it means that to you, and it means that. Now, there may be different applications of a passage.
Right.
But what it means, the author said. And that's where you try to discover what the author was saying. And I think Genesis chapter 1 is one of those things. Was God trying to say, we need to fight about whether the earth is 6,000 years old or 6 billion trillion years old? I don't think it's worth a fight. I believe, again, what I believe is the earth is young. But I think Usher, who came up with 6,000 years, see, that isn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
You don't find it, go, where does it say 6,000 years?
Where's the date? Actually, there's no dates in the Bible.
No.
And that's where you have another weird thing that comes up, where you have these people that study the numbers and try to figure out what it all means.
And again, I don't mind that people do that. There's interesting things you learn. But the issue is not the numbers. It's the life. It's how do you live? How should we then live? Francis Schaeffer was really good there. He did a movie called How Should We Then Live?
And a book.
And it was a book. And it really is the foundation. I was talking to a friend of mine this week, Rusty, who I worked with years and years ago, and now he continues as a middle-aged man to serve the Lord. And he was saying how he was trained in Francis Schaeffer as a young man. And I pointed out to him, I said, well, that answers one of the reasons that you've steadfast against a lot of the schemes of the devil, because you're a biblicist. And he didn't even know what that was. He said, what's that? I said, you believe the Bible is the final authority. It's the truth. It's infallible. It's all the things that systematic theologians try to come up with, all these ways to make sure nobody misses it. But they inerrancy, they come up with all these phrases, and they're all good. I don't have a problem with them. But really, as a common man, as a person who just tries to live every day, and with a wife and children, I've come to the conclusion, I'm just a biblicist. I just believe the Bible. It's knowledge. Now, what's interesting about Genesis chapter 1, I find most people, you have the creation scientists, and I work with the creation scientists. I love creation science. But the Genesis chapter 1 isn't a science book. And I understand some of the attacks on creation science is saying it isn't a science book. Now, is there science there? Yes. There is evidence. There's things that we can know about science that there's no other way to know it. But it's knowledge that has nothing to do with science. It's knowledge that gives us hints that we can go out and research and show Genesis chapter 1 is true. Genesis chapter 1 isn't a dating system. Now you can go and do all kinds of things with Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and all the genealogies, and you can come up with all those things, and you come up with a system that says the earth is 6,000 years old. And I don't have a problem that people do this. I think they're closer than the people that are saying trillions. I don't think they know. I think it's a systematic theology. Now, nothing wrong with systematic theology. I consult systematic theologians because all they're doing is systematizing the Bible, not the way it was written, into a system of living. And I think that's wonderful.
Is it
to
kind
consult but
you
it
say
is not.
systemology is kind of like.
Is what?
Would you say that systemology?
Systemology. I
That's
never
not
heard
right.
that.
What's the word?
That's a good word.
Systemology. That's not a word?
No.
What is it? Systematic theology.
Systemology.
Come on,
Actually, I kind
together.
of like that.
Systemology.
It's kind of like systemology. Yeah.
Okay. Aside from that, is it kind of like, to me, what you're saying, it's like you go to the library and well, it used to be, it's not anymore, it's all in computer, but you used to go to the library.
We go to Google now.
And you needed to find something, so you went to the cards and you looked up birds. And you pulled a drawer out, and it had hundreds of cards of birds to explain what they are, why they're different.
And these systematic theologies are
systemology.
Big. Systemologies. These systematic theologies are big, but they can make mistakes.
Yeah.
And one that I think is just screaming out is Louis Berry Schaeffer, who was a wonderful systematic theologian, and he was at Dallas Theological Seminary, did a great job, and he was wonderful. But he took Job and just simply put the philosophy of the day on his system, and when he read about Behemoth and Leviathan, he said, because he believed in the gap theory, he had a theory of Genesis 1 that was a time theory. It was like it worked this way. Instead of reading the passages as they were stated, he imposed his view on it, and he says, well, these are rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses. Well, you looked at the description he had, and it wasn't even close. And now we know that, more than likely they were brontosauruses and tyrannosauruses, but they didn't call them that. They called them in the Bible and in most cultures dragons. And the great dinosaurs, they didn't use the word dinosaur back then. They used the word dragon. Well, all the word dinosaur is just terrible lizard. And it was a new word they coined, and that's what the left does, and that's what the secularists do. They come up with a new word, and then you got to use their word to think in and to speak in, and that's the word dinosaur. And dinosaurs are a new invented word that was about 1850 or so with Darwin, and really all it is dragons.
A giant,
dragons.
Scary dragon.
So what we're going to try to do in the next few weeks is we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1 in a little different way. And the best thing I can come up with, and I learned this from our founding fathers in America, they viewed the Bible as
not personally, but from
I did personally. I read their documents. But it wasn't.
You're old, but you're not that old.
Well, it wasn't that personal. But I read their documents, and they viewed the Bible as the economic textbook of the patriots. Excuse me. And I never understood that when I first read it. I said, what? It's because they didn't see it as a devotional book. And again,
a thing to only be read a few passages on Sunday morning.
But they saw it as economics, but not in economics as a modern economist see things. And I've been struggling with coming to a definition, and I came up with a pretty good definition. It says it's a branch of knowledge concerned with the production, the consumption, and the transfer of resources. And I think that pretty much explains is what I see going on in Genesis. It's an explanation. It's knowledge. God has it's revealed knowledge. It's not scientific knowledge. It's revealed knowledge. Although it can be confirmed through science, it's knowledge from nature's God. It's direct knowledge. And it's knowledge concerned with the production, the consumption, and the transfer of resources.
Yeah, even when you think about Adam and Eve in the garden, that's what
well,
it's
that's
all
the
about.
whole point. Because after the sixth-day creation, in Genesis 1:26 through 28, Jesus actually, I'm trying to look it up and I'm not talking. Not Jesus. In Genesis 1 verses 1:26 through 28, it says, God made us in His image. I'm not going to read it right now. We'll put it in the text in there, in the podcast. But He made us in His image. And so many people try to say, He made us in He's loving. And that's true. We see that in the Bible, okay? But that isn't what Genesis is talking about. Genesis is talking about resources. Where did they come from? That's really what Genesis chapter 1 is talking about. How do we use them? What do we use them for? Those are the questions I think I see being asked. And in Genesis 1:26 it says we were made in God's image. Okay? But also then it says He gave a blessing, or some have said the first commandment in the in the whole Bible is be fruitful, multiply, fill, rule, and subdue the earth. He gave 5 basic things which are very fundamental to living in the real world. In other words, what's the opposite of being fruitful?
Dissipating. Waste,
dissipation, death.
Yeah.
Those are unfruitful. Multiplying. What's the opposite of multiplying?
Just cling to the one thing you have and never using it.
Be subtracting.
Yeah.
Taking away.
Oh, I'm thinking too.
Well, that's good. That's why I ask you, because you think differently. Be fruitful, multiply, filling. What's the opposite of filling?
Emptying.
Destroying. Okay.
If you only empty your pantry and you never fill it up, you don't have anything to eat.
That's right. Be fruitful, multiply, fill, and ruling. What's the opposite of ruling?
I'm thinking war, anarchy.
Kind of anarchy. Just
laziness.
Let it happen.
Nothing.
Laziness. Letting it happen.
Yeah.
We don't have any jurisdiction. We don't have anything. See, the opposite of fruitfulness of ruling would be anarchy.
Yeah.
Just anarchy.
Anarchy.
There's many different ways to rule things, but to let it all just happen, that's anarchy. And then be fruitful, multiply, fill, rule, and subdue. What's subdue?
Well, subdue is, to me, make things orderly, in their place, to make things go smoothly. If you don't, it's thinking in the garden, if you don't subdue the weeds, they take over your garden, and you can't be fruitful and multiply because they.
So the
out
idea
your
here is that you're subduing or making it to God's purpose.
Right. Yeah.
And this is God's purpose.
And subdue doesn't mean you just lay down and go to sleep.
It doesn't mean suppression.
No.
And it doesn't mean just lay down and let it happen.
Right.
It means you are actively participating in this concept of production, consumption, and transfer of resources. You're transferring resources from being wild to being godly.
And they all have to work together, because if you focus on one thing and let the other thing do nothing, you're still going to have chaos in the middle there.
Right.
It just doesn't work. They
all
work together.
What's interesting about this command, God created all this stuff, and we're going to go through it in some detail in the next few weeks. But God created all this stuff, which was the universe, the cosmos, the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and the earth, and the atmosphere, and the oxygen, and the humans. The humans were the last thing. And the humans were given dominion over this, or the right to subdue this stuff, to God's purpose. But not to their purpose, which is selfishness, is greed, and not to the devil's purpose, and not to the world's purpose, but to God's purpose. That's the purpose. Now, in building this, God gave a plan. He gave us a way. And it's kind of like, the more I live, the more convincing proofs I see that in Genesis chapter 1, there's a pattern, okay, of how this works. In other words, if I want to be productive and fruitful, and if I want my stuff, and I use the word stuff, okay, to grow, to be fruitful, I have to do certain things. What's the first thing I have to do to build something? I got to have stuff.
Oh, you got to have some stuff, yeah.
Stuff.
You got to have some stuff.
In other words,
well, Okay,
as a
think-
poor guy, I many times come to the point, well, I'd like to do this, but I don't have any stuff. I don't have the stuff to do it with.
I think of cooking a meal.
Okay.
You can't prepare a meal if you don't have stuff to prepare.
You don't have stuff.
You gotta have
So
some
you've got
stuff.
to create, you got to have the stuff, and you got to have it in an order. And we're going to use this word stuff to talk about production, consumption, and resources. It's kind of all that stuff. We've got to have all that stuff, okay, to make it fruitful and to subdue it. Now that's Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Is God's telling us He had a plan that people, to show what He's like through the material world, okay, through an economic system of fruitfulness, not an economic system of dissipation.
Here's a good, well, this may be off the beaten track, but when you read this verse 1, the very first verse in the Bible, when I make something, say a meal, we'll go to food because that's what I do, I cook the food here. I make a meal, I figure
Now,
out...
I cook sometimes.
Well, yeah, but
I make messes of
you
it.
make a mess and you don't clean up after yourself. When I make a meal, I gather my ingredients together and I make it, I cook it, I do whatever has to be done, and there's a meal. Now, if I want to, I can eat that whole meal myself because, you know, I made it, I prepared it, I put the ingredients
You
together.
mix your creativity with your labor in those
Right.
resources that are yours.
And it's just like this. God created the heavens and the earth. He created it. That means He owns it.
Yeah, and so it's yours.
It's His.
Yeah, and that's the first law of nature, and it's the first law of nature's God, that the Creator owns it. So let's read Genesis 1:1 and see.
I already just gave it away, didn't I?
Well, that's okay. That's okay. You didn't
All right.
totally, because we got to get there. I just lost it.
Genesis 1:1, and we're reading out of the New American Standard Bible. You want me to read?
Yeah.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Okay.
He owns it. He made it. He owns it.
But see, what do we see about God here? See, we're talking about the purpose of all this stuff is to show who God is. And we are in His image, so we should act like Him. What do we see Him doing here? And I don't find I've never even heard a sermon on this.
Well,
In the
I don't know,
beginning,
you're gonna-
God created the heavens and the earth. What do we see about God? Dennis
well,
Prager.
if you look at,
Let me say this. Dennis Prager says this is the most important verse in the whole Bible.
well, yeah, because if you don't believe that, what's the rest of the Bible got to do with anything?
Well,
Nothing.
he says he's got other reasons, but 'cause
Well,
he
I
doesn't
don't know
believe
what
the whole
he
Bible.
says, but to me, it's like, in the beginning there was nothing, there wasn't anything.
Okay, nothing or nothing.
Nothing. More than that, nothing,
was just-
nothing.
There was a different substance called God. And
We
God
can't-
is invisible.
In
God,
our minds, I don't think we can even
nothing is very
begin
hard
to
for us to
comprehend
perceive.
what nothing
Nothing.
is. Because
There was no laws of nature. There was no gravity. There was no radiation. There was no heat. There was no cool. There was no any of this other
Sunlight.
stuff. There was no
no
cells.
stars.
No stars. No moon. None of this stuff, okay, was there.
I mean, if I just sit in my chair and turn my head, I can probably see 500 different things.
Hmm.
So I can't even imagine what nothing
Nothing.
is.
But God is saying in the beginning, and He's saying the beginning of the cosmos, not the beginning of Him.
Right.
And the evolutionists have a real problem here because they all say the Earth has a beginning, but where'd the stuff come from?
Yeah.
It just kind of
Yeah.
out of nothing.
Out of nothing,
And see,
nothing,
that's
nothing.
where it has to come from a different substance, and we'll deal with that another time.
And then the next word, created.
Okay.
If you ever if you try to write a letter, you're creating something. What if you can't spell very well? What if you don't know how to write or read? I mean, to create something just,
You have to have knowledge.
oh wow, it almost blows your mind. To
But
think,
you just
create
finally
something.
got the answer to the question I asked you quite a while ago.
What was that?
What is this verse saying about God?
That He created.
He's a creator.
Yeah.
And we're to be like Him. We're in His likeness. So what are we to be?
Creators?
Yeah.
We're making stuff.
We're
making
creators.
stuff. Yeah.
See, creation is what is unique about humanity. Animals kind of build things, but they aren't creators. They don't imagine something that's never been seen and then put it into the material world. Animals, I'm not even sure we could say they have imagination, but they definitely are not creative. Now, they'll use different things to get their lust fulfilled of food and sex and whatever, but they don't create and build cities. They dig holes and destroy and live, but they don't build cities. And they build things, but only within. They don't create things, and that's what humans.
The best thing I can think of is a beaver builds a dam to make water. That's about the most creative thing I can think. I mean, I probably could. But
birds build nests, etc. But the idea. And somebody's calling us on the phone. We're gonna turn it off until we finish it. I don't know what's going on. Okay, let's
I just
see.
had one too, I think.
I can't do it. It won't. My phone's gone away. Oh, I should have turned this off.
Oh, well, this is okay. Just turn your volume down. Anyway, in the
back
beginning,
to,
God
because
created.
I want to finish this. We're getting close to the end.
Yeah.
Is creation is what God is showing us that He's doing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, but then the next sentence is very important. The next part of this sentence, because it has to do with what we do when you cook. You do a similar thing, right?
Oh,
We'll read the sentence.
Verse 2?
I don't know.
The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters.
Stop there. He created it. He made the stuff, and He's saying there wasn't even light. There weren't laws of nature. They were just gook. It was chaotic. It was anarchical.
Can you even imagine? You're thinking He created the earth was formless and void, but it's out there somehow. He's done something. We don't know exactly what it is.
That's why I like the word stuff.
Yeah.
He made stuff. But see, that's kind of what it is when you start cooking a meal.
Yeah, you got stuff.
You got all the stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't do much. It doesn't work together and make joy and fruitfulness and subdue the stuff to your pleasure and God's pleasure. Okay?
Because then you got to think, okay, I got all this stuff. Now how do I put it together?
How do I put it together? And that takes creativity. That takes imagination. So we see the first thing we see about God, He gathers His stuff. He isn't manufacturing anything yet. He's got the raw materials.
He created the heavens and the earth. He's got it in front of Him. Now what's He going to do?
In other words, space-time continuum. He created that. Okay, now I'm not sure where we're at.
Verse 2.
Okay, what's next?
God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day.
Okay, this is very important, and this is where the Bible does talk about 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, and I think that's important. But what is more important is what's behind that is God works. He's working, okay? And He's working at making stuff out of nothing, and then He's working at taking the stuff, and the core is you got to be able to see. If you can't see your stuff, it's hard to use.
Yeah.
So He creates light, and He separates light and darkness. So we see the forces of light and darkness, and probably there was more involved here.
Yeah.
There could be gravity, forces of gravity, all kinds of forces that are invisible.
Well, I think
were
it's
probably
interesting.
made at this time,
He saw the light.
or at least on this day.
The light was good, and so He separated the light from the darkness.
Yeah, that's good
because
too.
He saw that
was good.
It was good. It helps us see.
And here on this first step, I like to call it first step of economic development. He gathered the stuff. He made the stuff, which we don't make stuff. We gather stuff.
Right, yeah.
And then we begin to organize it.
We make stuff from the stuff that's already
No, we
made.
begin to organize it into what's useful and what's destructive.
Yeah.
Later on in the Bible is Satan is called the Prince of Darkness.
I was going to say a good example, real good example of this, because we're talking about cooking. You can take a crock pot and you can make a wonderful meal in it that many people can enjoy. Or you can take that same crock pot and make a bomb out of it and kill people.
That's a good example. And that's darkness, which is destruction and not subduing to good, but subduing to darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So God begins to establish this principle of fruitfulness even here in Genesis chapter 1. I think this is the core thing, and now God has the raw materials. And next week we're going to talk about, okay, where do we go from here? Because anytime you have a business plan, or you're trying to build a family, or you're trying to make your homework, or whatever it is, you have to do these basic things. You gather your stuff. Do you have the ability to get it done? Then you begin to, and you may have to have faith, or you may have to get more stuff. God was smart enough to get all the stuff together.
Yeah.
We aren't always in our business plans and our family plans.
Sometimes you get in the middle of making a meal and you go, oh, I don't have blank. Oh, you got to run to the store.
And we have to be smart in the way we build our stuff, our families, our meals, our businesses. We can't go over, get too much, or we can't get too little. My good friend Stephen, who this week had a wonderful new baby, delivered it at home, and he said to me, he says, well, I didn't know what to do, and I just says, wisdom's know what time it is. Okay, go, Lord, give me wisdom. And I got towels, and I did this, and I did this. See, he'd never done that before. Although, I think he had at the farm when we had the animals.
Yeah.
I think
towels are always an important issue.
He had helped us deliver some animals before. So, getting the stuff together is very important, and that's where the hospital has all the stuff together.
They're
so he got on the phone, and he got his son, he's homeschooling. They didn't panic, and they called, and they got the ambulance, and they got him to the doctor, to the hospital. It was wonderful, and now they're home. It's awesome.
And here's a good thing of planning. They went to the hospital where they were ready for him. They didn't go to a restaurant.
That's right. They didn't go out to eat. Wisdoms know what time it is. It wasn't time to go out to eat. It was time to get to the hospital. But see, here in Genesis, that's why I find it's such an interesting idea that I want to get this definition because I want to say it here again and I'm losing it. I think the Bible is giving us here in Genesis 1 is giving us a branch of knowledge that concerns production, consumption, and transfer of resources. Because God is showing now how he produced this. He's showing how it's used and now he's transferring it to Adam and Eve to have rule over. And that's economics. And that's why I think Genesis 1 is more of an economics textbook than even a science textbook, although there's some science there. Been a good day. This is Dan and Lee and our Sunday class. Come and visit us at our sundayclass.simplesite.com, or go to theroddenreporter.com and sign up and you will get our newsletter.